everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. I have three topics for tonight that I want to talk about. The first is Pepe Escobar's BRIC-O-Rama while touring Brazil. Also, the ban on non-competes. Yes, non-compete contracts with employers are now banned by the Federal Trade Commission. And finally, net neutrality is back. Finally back. So I want to talk about those three important topics here. I have a feeling that I'm missing the Jill Stein, Jeffrey Sachs rally. And I'll have to catch up to that at sometime later, I think. So, I'll start off with Pepe's piece about his trip to Brazil, because Pepe Escobar is really so entertaining. Oh, I'm sorry. I shared the wrong thing. So I have to go back and share the right thing. I shared the wrong tab. We shared tabs here. Where is it? Why am I not seeing it? Because sometimes when things are right in front of your face, you overlook them. Here we go. Okay, the title of this piece by Pepe is BRIC-O-Rama. On the road in Brazil, with an eye on Russia and China. It was published on May 1st, 2024. And I am picking it up from the UN's Review, where I often pick up his stuff from, because the UN's Review doesn't get me banned in various places. So here we go. There's a nice picture of Lula, the president of Brazil. Lula da Silva. Pepe says, I've just been immersed in an extraordinary experience, a mini tour of conferences in Brazil, encompassing 4 key cities: São Paulo, Rio, Salvador, and Belo Horizonte. Full houses, sharp questions, fabulously warm people, divine gastronomy, a deep dive into the 8th largest economy in the world, and a major BRICS plus node. As much as I was trying to impress the finer points of the long and winding road to multipolarity, and the multiple instances of frontal crash between NATO Stan and the global majority, that's what Pepe often calls the collective West, NATO Stan, I was learning nonstop from an array of generous Brazilians about the current inner contradictions of a society of astonishing complexity. Here's a picture, of course, of Rio, actually Sugarloaf Mountain from Rio, if I'm not mistaken. Beautiful scene, of course. It's as if I was immersed in a psychedelic journey conducted by Os Mutantes, the iconic trio of the late 1960s Tropicalia movement from the business front in Sao Paulo, with its world-class restaurants and frantic deal-making, to the blinding beauty of Rio, from Salvador, the capital of Brazilian Africa, to Belo Horizonte, the capital of the third wealthiest state in the Federation, which is Minas Gerais. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. A powerhouse of iron ore, uranium, and niobium exports. The language in Brazil is Portuguese, of course. The next section is called Shanghai. I learned about how China chose the state of Bahia as arguably its key node in Brazil, where Chinese investment is everywhere, even if Brazil is not yet a formal member of the Belt and Road Initiative. In Rio, I was presented with an astonishing work on Stoics, Zeno and Cleanthes, by essayist Ciro Moroni, delving among other issues into the equivalences between Stoic theology and the Hindu Vedanta, the tradition of culture, religion, and sacred rituals in India up to the Buddha era. And in a sort of psychedelic synchronicity, I felt like Zeno in the Agora as we debated the NATO proxy war against Russia in Ukraine at a lovely round pavilion, a mini Agora in fabled Liberty Square in Belo Horizonte, across the street from a fabulous exhibition of treasures of Peruvian art. Much to my astonishment, a Peruvian, Carlos Ledesma, flew in from Lima, especially for my conference and the exhibition. And he told me about the Shanghai port being built south of Lima, owned 70% by Costco, not Costco, C-O-S-C-O, and the rest by private Peruvian capital that will be a sister port of Shanghai. Shanghai, APAC in action across the Pacific. Next November, there will be 3 nearly simultaneous key events in South America: the G20 in Rio, the APEC summit, APEC this is, APEC summit in Lima, and the inauguration of Shanghai. Shanghai will be boosted by no less than 5 rail corridors that may eventually be built, certainly with Chinese investment, from the agribusiness Valhalla in the Brazilian center-west all the way to Peru. Yes, China is all over the place in its largest trade partner in Latin America, much to the despair of a hegemon sending lowly functionary little Blinken to Beijing to hear the letter of a new law by Xi Jinping himself, It's cooperation or confrontation. Quote, downward spiral, unquote. Your downward spiral. That, I think, is a message to the hegemon. A river from Tibet to Xinjiang. At the Belo Horizonte Conference, I shared the stage with remarkable Sebastian Kiwangi Bizaru from Congo, who supervises PhD programs at the Candido Mendes University, as well as being a professor of international law after an extraordinary academic journey. He is also the author of a groundbreaking book examining the highly debatable role of the UN Security Council in the conflicts of the Great Lakes, focusing on Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The top researcher, Natasha Reyna, we pored over a map of China, retracing her travels east to west last year, all the way to the Xinjiang border, as she filled me in on the astonishing Hanqi River, or Red Flag River project, first proposed in 2017. No less than an attempt to divert water from Tibet to the dry lands and deserts of Xinjiang by building an enormous, over 6,000 kilometer long artificial river, including the branch canals. The projected river will be slightly less longer than the Yangtze, diverting 60 billion cubic meters of water a year, more than the annual flow of the Yellow River. Predictably, ecologists in China are attacking the project, which may have already had an official go-ahead and is proceeding discreetly. And then as I was on the road between Rio, and Minas Gerais, the BRICS 10 ministers of economy and heads of central banks met in Sao Paulo, and all of them hailed the drive towards independent, quote unquote, payment settlement mechanisms. Russia is the 2024 president of this crucial group of BRICS 10 ministers and heads of central bank. Russian Vice Minister of Finance, Ivan Chebeskov, went straight to the point. Quote, most countries agree that payment in national currencies is what the BRICS need. The Russian Ministry of Finance privileges the creation of a common digital platform congregating the BRICS central banks' digital currencies and their national systems of transmitting financial messages. Crucially, at this BRICS 10 meeting, most members stressed they are in favor of totally bypassing the US dollar for trading. Russian Minister of Finance, Anton Siluanov, was even bolder. He said that Russia is proposing to BRICS the creation of an independent and, quote, depoliticized, unquote, global system of payments. And that, my friends, is the problem that we created for ourselves by politicizing the global system of payments based on the dollar. Something that only very stupid people would do. And we have had a lot of very stupid people running our foreign policy for years now, the neocons of both parties. Basiloanov hinted that the system may be based on blockchain, considering its low cost and minimal control exercised by the hegemon. BRICS map the new world in Sao Paulo. A day before the meeting in Sao Paulo, which, by the way, is the New York of that country. It's most similar to New York. I understand. of any city in the world. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Moscow supported the development of these BRICS strategies, noting that, quote, if we manage to develop independent financial mechanisms that will seriously question the globalization mechanism currently led by the West, unquote. The wise Sergei Lavrov. As over 100 nations are currently researching or embryonically implementing a digital currency in their central banks, a big breakthrough is imminent in Russia, a process I have been following in detail since last year. In the end, it's all about sovereignty. That was the crux of the most serious debates I had this past week in Brazil with academic players and on several podcasts related to the conferences. It's the overarching theme hanging over the Lula government as the president seems to cast the figure of a lonely fighter cornered by a vicious circle of fifth columnists and comprador elites. In Belo Horizonte, I was presented with yet another astonishing book by a former brilliant government official, the late Celso Brandt. After a sharp analysis of the modern history of Brazil and its interactions with imperialism, he reminds the reader of what stellar Mexican writer and poet, Octavio Paz, said in the 1980s about Brazil and China, quote, these will be the two great protagonists of the 21st century. I remember Octavio Paz actually saying that. When Paz rendered his verdict, every indicator favored Brazil, which since 1870 held the largest GDP growth in the world. Brazil exported more than China, and from 1952 to 1987 was growing at an annual rate of 7.4%. Continuing the trend, Brazil would be the fourth largest economy in the world by now. It's between 8th and 9th, side by side with India, and could be the fifth, were it not for direct destabilization by the empire starting in the 2010s, culminating with the car wash operation, in Brazil. The car wash operation was the one that sent Lula to jail and preceded the attempt to get rid of Dilma Rousseff as president, which was successful, of course. Lula was exonerated, eventually, and got out of prison, of course, and is now back in the presidency. And Dilma is the president of the new National Development Bank, otherwise known as the BRICS Bank. But going on with the article, that's exactly what Brandt shows, how the hegemon intervened to crash Brazilian development. And that started way before car wash. Kissinger was already saying in the 1970s that, quote, the United States will not allow the birth of a new Japan under the equator line, unquote. Hardcore neoliberalism was the privileged tool, while China, under little helmsman Deng Xiaoping and then Jiang Zemin, went full sovereign, Brazil was mired in neo-colonial dependency. Lula tried and is now trying it again against all odds and surrounded on all sides with Brazil, branded as a, quote, swing state, unquote, by U.S. think tank land and potential victims of new rounds of imperial hybrid war. That means, of course, war by the intelligence services, in particular, led by the CIA, of course. Lula and some solid academic elites away from power know full well that as a neo-colony, Brazil will never fulfill its potential of being side by side with China, as prophesied by Paz, the great protagonist of the 21st century. That was the major takeaway of my psychedelic tour of Tropicalia. sovereignty. Viktor Orban, accused by simpletons of being a member of a fuzz, quote, neo-fascist international, unquote, nailed it with a simple formulation, quote, the inglorious period of Western civilization will be brought to an end this year by replacing the world built on progressive liberal hegemony with a sovereigntist one. And that is another way, of course, to describe the multipolar world that is now emerging. But as Pepe has indicated in many other articles that we have read and analyzed here, and also in this article, it's a winding path and a bit of a long one towards the multipolar world, with lots and twists and turns, because the hegemon is resisting every step of the way. I originally wanted to cover that last night, but didn't get a chance. But it's so very important as an article that I did want you to see me go over it. So I forgot to share this on Facebook earlier, so I will do that now. So I now want to move on to the second. You're up against Jill Stein live virtual rally. I'll have to watch later. I know, I'll have to watch that later too. I realized I was, but I realized there wasn't much I could do about it. So at least I couldn't think of anything to do about it. So I'm going to get to my second topic, which is the ban on non-competes. There's a great article on this ban by Matt Stoller. Great piece from his Substack. Matt is a great writer and a great analyst. By the way, a friend of Stephanie Kelton's. When they both were on Bernie's team in 2015 and 2016, they shared an office when Stephanie was working for the Budget Committee. So Matt is very MMT aware, though he doesn't seem to talk about it much. But this is from his Substack, his newsletter, which is called Big by Matt Stoller. You should be seeing the piece now. Did I successfully share this? I don't know if I did, so I'll share it again. Yeah, I must have shared it. I got this. Share now. Okay. That certainly is it, so. The headline is The FTC Engages Corporate America by Eliminating Non-Compete Agreements. Just that headline, it's such wonderful news. People like me, of course, anytime we went to work for any company, until I became an independent consultant sometime in the 1990s. Well, actually, that's not quite true because I had my computer business before that. But before my computer business, I was forced to sign a lot of non-competes. It was standard practice, when I was growing up. I thought it was highly abusive. Anyway, the tagline on this one is that the Federal Trade Commission took action to prohibit employment contracts that stop employees from working for rivals. Then it was immediately sued by the son of a famous Supreme Court justice. Going on. Today, the Federal Trade Commission, led by Chair Lina Khan, and I certainly hope that if Jill Stein should get to be the President of the United States, or Cornel West, or Robert Kennedy, that each of the three of them would keep Lina Khan on as the head of the Federal Trade Commission. She has been a throwback to the FDR New Deal era. She is wonderful. We need to keep her on. But led by Lina Khan, voted 3-2 to eliminate contracts that stop people from switching jobs, contracts known as, quote, non-compete agreements. The rule goes into effect in 120 days and prohibits nearly all non-competes. There are a few exceptions. The FTC rule can't touch non-competes with certain nonprofits and within few regulated industries. But by and large, this rule, unless conservative judges step in aggressively, means that American employers will no longer be able to use non-compete provisions in 120 days. That's only 4 months. It's a big win. And yet, within a few hours of the vote, well-known conservative lawyer Eugene Scalia, the son of former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, sued the FTC over its non-compete ban. I might add, in complete contradiction of the idea of freedom of contract. Okay, the conservatives are big supporters of freedom of contract, but not when that freedom is goring their own ox. With the goal of getting the judiciary to strike the rule down and perhaps even declare the commission itself unconstitutional. So what happened? What are the legal arguments? What are the stakes? And who is likely to prevail? That's what I'm writing about today. What happened? What is a non-compete? Let's start with the guts of the dispute, which is over the actual policy to eliminate non-compete agreements. These contracts are pervasive in America, largely because computers have made it easy to print out employment contracts. Over the past 4 years, the FTC has been accumulating evidence through public comments and by reviewing economic data showing that they are a serious problem in our economy, significantly depressing wages and business formation. I wrote about it extensively in 2023 when the government proposed the rule. Since 2000, the use of non-competes at all levels of society has exploded. 8 years ago, 1 in 5 employees in the United States was bound by one of these contracts, or 35 to 40 million people. It's no longer just high-level employees who have them, but sandwich shop workers and janitors. For instance, 30% of hairstylists work under a non-compete, as do 45% of family physicians. Non-competes facilitate consolidation, especially in healthcare, where doctors are trapped into practices bought by private equity groups. Such contracts are already unenforceable or restricted in many states, including California, Colorado, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Oregon, Rhode Island, Virginia, and Washington. Virginia, wow. And a lot of non-competes are never enforced and barely noticed by the employer or employee. Still, for many people, being bound by a non-compete can be a truly horrible experience, a soft form of indentured servitude if you are tethered to a place and a specific skill set. While the ostensible purpose of such contracts is that an employee and employer are bargaining in a relatively equal position over the terms of work, it's usually a case the employers don't know what they are signing or aren't in a position to refuse In some states where non-competes are legally unenforceable, employers still threaten employees who don't know any better. And this happens a lot. One person who complained to me is a real estate agent who had to put up with sexual harassment by a particularly litigious boss. I've heard from doctors whose lives are ruined by being forced to work in a bad practice, but who cannot move because their family is rooted in a particular area. One comment to the FTC came from a graphics designer for signage who was bankrupted by a lawsuit from her control-hungry boss and a small-town judge. These agreements are in every industry: finance, doctors in rural areas, startup founders, printing, floor installations, title and escrow work, software, NASA contracting, computer antivirus research, and video game production. The overall goal is to cut wages by reducing the ability of people to bargain with rival employers. The arguments against banning non-competes can seem compelling, but they don't stand up to scrutiny. To eliminate non-competes doesn't harm business, it helps it. Silicon Valley exists precisely because non-competes are unenforceable in the state. And while workers can leave and take specialized knowledge or customers with them, such possibilities are better covered with non-solicitation agreements or trade secrets law. Other practices, such as tenure-based wage increases, can reduce people leaving to go to competitors or setting up shop on their own. As for the idea that non-competes reduce investments in knowledge industries, well, that California exists undercuts that claim. Notably, lawyers simply don't allow non-competes in the legal profession. The American Bar Association has a rule prohibiting them, and yet the legal profession seems to exist and function. In politics, the FTC has been playing out this process for years because rules take a really long time to get right. Today, its decision got wide coverage in print, TV, and online, trending on different social networks and drawing substantial amounts of commentary, including from many people who would benefit. The president tweeted it out, members of Congress are discussing it, and it could even make an appearance in political campaigns. President Biden tweeted, "Folks, my administration has announced two big new steps to get American workers a better deal. Let me explain. First, the FTC is cracking down on, quote, non-compete agreements, unquote, contracts that employers use to prevent their workers from changing jobs, even if that job will pay a few dollars more or provide better working conditions. Workers ought to have the right to choose who they want to work for. Second, for millions of workers who make less than $58,656, USDOL, Department of Labor, of course, is saying you have the right to overtime protections. If you work extra hours, you deserve better pay." Was there much opposition? Not really, at least not publicly, with one exception. Few want to oppose the FTC's action directly because it just feels icky to stand up for the right to prevent someone from quitting and getting a new job. So the opposition is going to be procedural and left to the courts. And yet, among big business, there is a high degree of public anger. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce already said they'd sue before the rule came out, but they were leapfrogged by Scalia's client. Indeed, the speed and eagerness of the complaint was remarkable, revealing corporate lawyers will practically climb over hot coals to litigate against Lina Khan in front of a Texas judge. The firm Scalia is representing, a tax company called Ryan LLC, immediately put its challenge on the top of the main page of its website, just below the slogan, quote, "liberating our clients from the burden of being overtaxed, freeing their capital to invest, grow, and thrive," unquote. Presumably, the corporation is using its court challenge as a marketing technique to attract clients whose executives hate Lina Khan. Here's their website homepage. There it is. Okay. Ryan challenges new non-compete rule issued by Federal Trade Commission. Can the FTC just ban these contracts? Despite whatever hand-wringing you might hear about the FTC's legal authority, the answer is yet. In Section 5 of the Federal Trade Act, Congress granted the FTC authority to ban, quote, unfair methods of competition, unquote. In Section 6G, Congress granted the FTC the ability to, quote, make rules and regulations for the purpose of carrying out the provisions, unquote, of its charter. The FTC has used its 6G authority many times, including 26 times between 1968 and 1973, on key high-profile issues like banning the mailing of unsolicited credit cards, which banks did all the time until the commission acted to stop it. Yeah, they used to send the cards to children, and then they would take the cards, start charging things, and of course the families were on the hook then. So the statute is clear. What about the courts? Well, in 1973, the D.C. Circuit Court ruled the FTC is, quote, is authorized to promulgate rules defining the meaning of the statutory standards of the illegality the Commission is empowered to prevent. So there we go. And Congress, well, just a year later, in 1974, Congress changed the rulemaking authority of the FTC on the consumer protection side, but left its rulemaking authority on unfair methods of competition alone, even rejecting amendment in which, quote, the FTC would have prohibited from prescribing rules with respect to unfair competitive practices. So Congress then curtailed the FTC, even though it could have. And these readings of FTC authority make sense historically as well. Congress created the FTC in 1914 because their attempt to regulate business through the Sherman Antitrust Act had failed, as judges just couldn't stay on top of the innovation in commerce. So legislators sought to create a regulatory commission with a flexible mandate to define unfair practices. There are significant limits in the FTC's authority. Only the FTC can bring a case that violates an FTC rule. Private litigants can't do that, which of course is very unfortunate. And of course, it's all subjected to judicial review, but the legislators debated whether to define bad practices clearly in the statute or let the FTC do it, and they chose the latter. Non-compete agreements, because they became commonplace relatively recently, where our method of commerce designed to inhibit competition falls squarely within this remit. So you'd think that the case for the FTC having legal authority would be a slam dunk. But it's not, for reasons I'll go into. In this case, Eugene Scalia made four main points opposing FTC authority to issue the rule. First, he argued the text of the law granting the FTC authority hasn't been used a lot since the 1970s, and so it didn't mean what it said. What? That seems ridiculous to me. Second, he claimed the court precedent that interpreted the text was, quote, controversial at the time and has not aged well, unquote, aka it's precedent that can be ignored. That seems a little ridiculous to me too, but it might be convincing to some of the conservatives on the court. Third, he said that other antitrust statutes treat non-compete agreements differently. And fourth, he made the point that a non-compete ban is a big economic change best left to Congress. Scalia also made some other arguments about how the FTC is structured in an unconstitutional manner, but that's not particularly unique in this case. It's not clear how any of Scalia's points are relevant. The text of the statute and court precedent are what controls, not whether a lawyer thinks a precedent is old and bad. It also doesn't matter if other antitrust laws don't apply, because, well, there are other antitrust laws, not this antitrust law. Finally, while the change is economically significant, so what? The FTC's authority is broad-based. That's how Congress structured it. Doctrines putting limits on regulators are meant to limit regulators to their existing statutory authority, and the FTC has authority here. What are the stakes and who is going to win? Still, at some level, who is right doesn't matter. What matters is what a judge thinks. And in this case, the answer is that it's not really clear. The case is initially going to Trump-appointed Dallas Judge Ada Brown, a former prosecutor and plaintiff lawyer After Brown hears the case, it might get appealed and go to the Fifth Circuit, then the Supreme Court. It's also possible the case that gets dismissed for procedural reasons and a different version of it moves through the courts. Regardless, this one is likely to get appealed, regardless of the outcome at a lower level. How will it be received by the higher courts? The question is how susceptible judges are to public scrutiny. Judges don't like to be unpopular, but at the same time, corporate lawyers and judges have invented a suite of legal concepts to facilitate the consolidation of economic power, and many of those concepts are well entrenched in the courts. Most came from a view in the 1960s and 1970s that regulators had lost sight of the underlying text of a law and twisted and abused and expanded their authority untethered from legislative goals. But gradually, the logic of attacking the excess reach of regulators became simply attacking regulators, even when the text of the statute is clear. Today, there are a lot of different legal theories whose intent was to tether rules to what Congress wrote, but instead often give judges lots of ways to strike down rules that they don't like. The stakes on all sides are high. If the FTC's rule is struck down, then it will fall to Congress and states to ban non-competes, which will eventually happen, but far more slowly, and the FTC will have a tool removed from its arsenal, though to be honest, it's a tool the FTC hasn't used very often. That said, if the Commission has its authority to uphold, then not only will non-competes be unenforceable, but the FTC will be able to write rules to address other unfair methods of competition. Writing a rule is bureaucratically nightmarish, so these aren't going to come off the assembly line. They require immense amounts of economic and legal work, but rule writing is a way of addressing economy-wide unfair practices, and Congress intended for the FTC to operate, and it's potentially much faster than antitrust litigation, which can take 5 to 10 years. At any rate, you should feel proud of this decision. It's been a long time coming and something we've been involved in from the beginning. Big ideas take a while, but that's because they are big and have to be done properly. And this is yet another sign we're starting to see the new way of thinking take root. Now, wasn't that a great piece? I thought that was wonderfully written, to the point, very, very clearly written. And of course, the banning of non-competes is a wonderful objective because the freedom of people who go to work is directly restricted by the non-compete agreements. It's very unfair because when the employer and the employee come to the bargaining table, we all know the reality is they're not equal. That's especially in the case where the economy is slow in certain areas, an employee happens to work in one of those areas, and it's hard to find a job. So when the employer gets a job, they're constrained to take it, non-compete and all. It's not really an equal bargaining situation. It is restrictive of freedom. However, I had another piece on non-competes that I wanted to cover. So let me go to that. This one is also on non-competes. I should be able to skip a good part of it because it's going to go over things that have been gone over by Matt Stoller. This is by Heidi Shearholtz, who was very prominent also. It was originally published at inequality.org, but Heidi Shearholtz is she is the director, the president, I believe, of, let me see. I keep guessing here, but I forgot what it is. But there's her, the president of the Economic Policy Institute, okay, the EPI. Formerly, she was chief economist to the U.S. Secretary of Labor, serving under Secretary Tom Perez. in the Obama administration. So, the FTC's new ban on non-competes helps workers reclaim their power. That's exactly what Matt was saying. Non-competes make it harder for workers to move to better jobs, artificially depress their wages. That will change later this year because the FTC issued a new rule. Non-compete agreements are employment provisions that ban workers at one company from working or starting a competing business within a certain period of time after leaving a job. They're ubiquitous, and there are some more statements about it here. More than a quarter of private workplaces with an average wage of less than $13 per hour use non-compete agreements for all their workers, according to one survey. The only leverage non-union workers have with their employees is their ability to quit and take a job somewhere else. But employers have been using non-compete agreements to cut that source of worker power off at the knees. By keeping workers from finding better opportunities, they reduce wages and reduce the formation of new firms. Employers don't need non-competes to protect their trade secrets, as they sometimes claim. Intellectual property law already provides significant legal protections for trade secrets. Non-competes have been unenforceable in California for decades without keeping that state from becoming a leader in tech innovation. So that's basically this article. It concludes by saying non-competes are bad for workers, bad for consumers, and bad for the broader economy. By banning them, the FTC's rule will help raise wages for workers and take an important step toward creating an economy that is not only strong, but also works for the working people. Let's hope that the courts don't try to cripple this. If they do, the FTC law should be passed again immediately by Congress, but with the exceptions clause of Article 3, Section 2, in order to prevent a review by the Supreme Court. That's what ought to happen in order to make sure this sticks. But I don't know if I can absolutely make sure that it sticks. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen now for the third topic, which is something everyone should celebrate, and that is the FCC bringing back net neutrality after, 7 years? It's been gone already. This is the picture of the Federal Communications Commission FCC Chair Jessica Rosenworcel. She was attending the Paley International Council Summit in New York City on November 8th, 2022. Everyone should celebrate. FCC restores net neutrality rules. Today marks the last day that internet service providers can continue to put profit over people, unquote, said one advocate. This article is by Jessica Corbett from Common Dreams, April 25th, 2024. Very important news. Open Internet advocates on Thursday applauded the Federal Communications Commission's long-anticipated vote to revive net neutrality rules and reestablish FCC oversight of broadband. The 3-2 vote along party lines to reclassify broadband as a public service under Title II of the Communications Act came 7 months after FCC Chair Jessica Rosenworcel announced the push in the wake of the U.S. Senate confirming Commissioner Ana Gomez. Commissioner Jeffrey Starks joined Rosenworcel and Gomez to launch the rulemaking process last year and finalize the policy change on Thursday. Commissioner Brendan Carr and Nathan Symington both aligned with the powerful telecom industry by opposing the effort to provide internet service to prevent internet services providers from blocking, throttling, or engaging in paid prioritization of lawful online content. Demand Progress Education Fund senior campaigner Joey DeFrancesco said the revival, quote, has been desperately needed, unquote, since former FCC chair Ajit Pai, an appointee of Republican President Donald Trump. Yes, he was appointed the FCC chair, okay, uh, by Donald Trump, but this doesn't mention that he was originally appointed to the FCC as a member of the commission and a conservative member of the commission by Barack Obama. That was a disastrous appointment. And of course, he became the chair, but even as a member, he was opposing that neutrality. And he was a thorn in the side for a few years before Donald Trump appointed him to be the chair. I don't know why they failed to mention that here, but it's a serious oversight. Anyway, he led the disastrous decision in 2017 to gut a 2015 agency policy codifying the principle that has been foundational to the internet since its inception. Quote, internet access is not a luxury, but a necessity to participate in society and survive in our modern economy, DeFrancesco stressed. Quote, the FCC's new rule will ensure the Commission has the full ability to expand broadband and the authority to ensure access to an open internet, unquote. Free Press co-chair Craig Aaron declared that everyone should celebrate today's FCC vote, unquote. Quote, public support for net neutrality is overwhelming, and people understand why we need a federal watchdog to protect everyone's access to the most essential communications platform of our time, unquote. He noted, and quote again, the FCC heard the outcry and did its job, delivering on promises to stand with internet users and against big telecom companies and their trade groups, which have spent untold millions of dollars to spread lies about net neutrality and thwart any oversight or regulation, unquote. Aaron praised Rosenworcel and her staff for leading the restoration effort, as well as Starks and Gomez for working with her to reverse the Trump FCC's move and ensure that the agency can once again protect internet users whenever big phone and cable companies like AT&T, Comcast, Spectrum, and Verizon attempt to harm them, unquote. Quote, big cable and phone companies won't be able to pick and choose what any of us can say or see online. Net neutrality is a guarantee that these companies will carry our data across the internet without undue interference or unreasonable discrimination, unquote, he emphasized. Because this is what democracy should look like, public servants responding to public sentiment, taking steps to protect just and reasonable services and free expression, and showing that the government is capable of defending the public interest, unquote. Evan Greer is on Mastodon and Blue Sky. He tweeted on X at Evan Greer. The FCC is about to restore net neutrality. Finally, the telecom industry lit a mountain of money on fire and used every dirty trick in the book to try to prevent this. But millions spoke out, organized, and protested, and we won. And there's a video on the FCC vote on the net neutrality order. After 7 long years, it was 7 years, the FCC is set to restore net neutrality. So that's wonderful. Michael Copps, a former FCC commissioner and current Common Cause special advisor, was similarly enthusiastic, saying that, quote, if I weren't out of the country today, I would be personally at the FCC jumping up and down, saluting the majority for reinstituting the network neutrality rules that was so foolishly eliminated by the previous commission. quote, our communications technologies are evolving so swiftly, affecting so many important aspects of our individual lives. They must be available to all of us on a non-discriminatory basis. They must advance the public interest. Unquote. I was as we fight to regain our democracy if we ever had one, but going on. He continued, quote again, we still have much to do, but today let's celebrate a huge step forward. The vote notably comes during an election year, and as Democratic President Joe Biden, net neutrality supporter, is gearing up for a November rematch against Trump. The internet is crucial to engagement. It functions as a virtual public square where social justice movements organize and garner support, unquote, said Common Cause's Ishan Mehta. The American people, unquote. But Jenna also piled on the praise, proclaiming that today marks the last day that internet service providers can continue to put profit over people. Quote, we are thrilled that the FCC now has the authority it needs to protect consumers, promote the exercise of First Amendment rights online, and ensure that everyone has access to high-quality, affordable internet, unquote, she said. However, we urge the Commission not to exercise its authority to preempt consistent state laws that grant consumers additional protections. And the Open Tech Institute tweeted, the reinstatement of strong open internet protections under Title II of the Communications Act are vital to promoting a virtuous cycle of online innovation, competition, and consumer choice, unquote. So John Berkmeyer, legal director at Public Knowledge, also celebrated the vote while stressing the commission's work is far from over. In addition to warning of court fights to come, he said that, quote, broadband providers will continue attempting to rebrand their old plans for internet fast and slow lanes, hoping to sneak them through, unquote. Quote, the FTC will need to diligently enforce its rules, Bergmayer argued, quote, including clarifying that discrimination in favor of certain apps or categories of traffic, quote, impairs, quote unquote, and degrades, quote unquote, traffic that is left in the slow lane, and that broadband providers cannot simply take apps that people use on the internet every day and package them as a separate non-broadband service, unquote. The FCC must also ensure that practices are not expressly prohibited, but still unreasonably interfere with the ability of end users to freely use the internet or to edge providers to freely compete, okay, are disallowed, he added. Quote, these practices include discriminatory zero rating and network interconnection practices. Like Leventoff, he also recognized the vital role of states with stricter policies, saying those, quote, with excellent net neutrality and broadband consumer protection statutes like California can be a nationwide model for other states and the FCC to strengthen their own rules, unquote. And that's the end of that piece. And I wanted to bring the glad news to you. So now that I've done that, I want to take account of your comments. There aren't very many today. Steve said, I'm up against Jill Stein, the live virtual rally I'll have to watch later. And Kay said, hi, Joe and Steve. I completely understand, Steve. I hope you will watch later. And I'm grateful that you came in the first place. And 69 said, hello, Joe, 6IX, that is. Hello, Joe, stopping by for a minute. That non-compete sounds like a sort of enslavement. Yeah, it always smacked of enslavement. It was certainly very constraining. And for more and more people as time went on, because everybody was signing the frickin' non-competes, as you saw in this article, even going down to people making $13 an hour, which was totally ridiculous. Okay, but that's the show for tonight. I am now going over to Dee's. If Dee is still having a show, I don't know if she is having a show. She may be at the stream of Jill Stein and Jeff Sachs herself. Okay, but anyway, I'm going to end the stream now, and I'm going to see what she's doing and see if I need to go over there.